I never imagined that a single whisper could shake the foundation of everything I believed about my life. It was late, quiet, the kind of night when the world feels like it has stopped moving, and yet inside my house, something had shifted, though I didn't realize it at first. I was in the kitchen, fixing a cup of tea for myself because sleep had abandoned me again. The rain was soft against the windows, a gentle patter that usually brought comfort, but that night, it made everything feel heavier. I remember the way the light fell from the lamp above the sink, casting long shadows across the room. Everything seemed ordinary, safe, familiar. And then I heard it. It was her voice. My wife. My partner for nearly 12 years. She was speaking softly, almost like a secret meant only for her. But the words were sharp, cutting through the quiet. I love you, David. David. That was not my name. Not even close. My heart skipped in a way that I didn't know it could. I dropped the cup I was holding, and it shattered against the tile floor. The sound echoed like an alarm through my chest. My first thought was disbelief. Surely, I had misheard. But I hadn't. I knew every inflection in her voice. Every pause, every breath. That whisper was hers, and it was meant for someone else. I didn't confront her immediately. I didn't storm into the room screaming or throw accusations that I might later regret. I didn't know what I would have said anyway. I just stood there, staring at the mess at my feet, listening to my own heartbeat, and letting the silence fill the space where certainty had always lived. Our marriage. I thought it was strong. I thought it was steady. We had our fights, of course. Who doesn't? But beneath the arguments, I believed there was always love, trust, a shared life that neither of us would willingly betray. I had no idea that beneath the surface, another story was being written, one I wasn't part of. The first thing I felt was confusion. The second was a dull, heavy ache, like a small stone lodged in my chest. I wanted to rewind, to go back to every moment and read between the lines, to see the clues I had missed. But the hardest part wasn't just the whisper. It was the realization that the woman I had loved with all my heart, the woman I had trusted, had allowed herself to feel this way about someone else, and that somehow I had been blind to it. I didn't sleep that night. I walked from room to room, each one holding memories of laughter, arguments, quiet conversations, and mundane routines. I passed the living room and saw the couch where we had shared our first movie night as a married couple. I could almost hear the echo of our laughter, see the half-empty popcorn bowl, feel her hand brushing against mine. The contrast between then and now was unbearable. I thought about how we met, those early days when every word and gesture felt like it mattered, when love seemed simple and unshakable. I remembered the nights we stayed up talking, sharing dreams that felt so certain, so unbreakable. And now, in the soft glow of the kitchen light, that certainty felt like a cruel joke. It wasn't just the whisper that hurt. It was the slow accumulation of small signs I had ignored. The extra hours at work she claimed were meetings, but smelled of excuses. The sudden need for privacy on her phone. The distant glances that I had brushed off as fatigue or stress. All the little moments I had told myself were nothing. Now, in the harsh light of that whispered name, they screamed at me in hindsight. I spent that night replaying everything, wondering how I had been so oblivious. And the more I thought, the more I felt my own guilt. Had I missed the signs because I was too focused on work, too wrapped up in my routines, too sure that love was enough to carry us through anything? Maybe. Or maybe she had always been quiet about it, careful, and I would never have seen it coming. Morning came with the same soft drizzle, but the world outside felt changed. The sky was the same shade of gray, the streets glistening with rain, yet everything inside me was fractured. I went through our morning routine mechanically, greeting her with a smile that felt like a mask, making breakfast, pouring coffee, watching her sip it as though nothing had happened. She didn't notice anything, of course. How could she? I had always been the calm one, the patient one. Now, I was learning patience in a way I had never known, because losing my balance emotionally could only make things worse. That day, I walked through our house like a ghost, noticing everything I had taken for granted. The way she folded laundry, the smell of her shampoo, the softness of the couch cushions she liked to sit on. Each detail was a reminder of all that I stood to lose, and the thought was unbearable. I tried to speak to her casually, asking about her plans for the day, her work, little things that didn't matter but mattered so much because I was grasping at fragments of normalcy. And she answered, smiling, her eyes warm, oblivious, or perhaps aware and skilled at hiding it. I couldn't tell. That uncertainty was another layer of pain. As the day went on, I felt an emptiness I hadn't known before. Not anger, not rage. Just a hollow ache that spread through my chest and shoulders, making me want to curl up and disappear. I walked through our home, looking at the life we had built together, the framed photos, the shared belongings, the books we had picked out for each other. Everything was a reminder of love, trust, and devotion. And everything felt like a lie. I remember sitting in the living room that evening, rain dripping steadily against the windows, the soft hum of the heater filling the space. I held a photograph of the two of us from years ago, a wedding picture. We were smiling, eyes full of hope, hearts unguarded. I traced her face with my finger and whispered her name, almost like a prayer, almost like a plea. Why? I didn't get an answer. Not then, and not for a long time. Over the next few days, I started noticing the patterns I had ignored. Small changes in her routine, subtle shifts in tone, fleeting expressions that didn't match her words. And with each observation, the weight of reality pressed harder. It wasn't just a fleeting moment, a mistake, or a misunderstanding. Something fundamental had shifted between us. And it was my life, my marriage, my heart. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I listened, I watched, I waited. There was a strange kind of courage in stillness. The courage to see clearly without jumping to conclusions, to let my mind gather the pieces before speaking. It was during those days that I began to reflect on everything we had shared. The good times, the quiet nights, the moments of joy and sadness alike. I remembered the way she laughed when I danced badly in the kitchen, the way she held my hand during stressful times, the way we built our routines like a small, unbreakable fortress against the chaos of the world. And I realized, painfully, that love is not always enough. Not when hearts start seeking connection elsewhere. Not when whispers carry the weight of betrayal. I remember the first time I tried to talk about it with her. I asked gently, quietly, as if the mere sound of my voice could shatter the fragile balance we had left. Is there someone else? She looked at me, eyes wide, hesitant, silent. And in that silence, I understood everything I needed to know. After that first night of whispers, the house felt different. The walls seemed thinner, the floors more echoing, as if every footstep I took was louder than it should be. Even the familiar hum of the refrigerator sounded foreign. My mind was always busy now, running through every memory, every shared glance, every word exchanged in the last months or years, searching for signs I hadn't noticed, little cracks that had been forming silently. I noticed the way she had started closing doors softly behind her, muting the sound of her movements as though to hide herself. The subtle shift in her tone when she answered me, polite, warm, but not the warmth I remembered. There were moments when her hand would brush mine while passing by, and I would feel the distance in that fleeting touch. It was always there, silent, almost imperceptible, but it left a sting nonetheless. I started asking myself questions I didn't have answers to. Was this always happening and I had been blind? Or had something changed recently? Was it me somehow? Did I fail to notice her needs? Had my life, my routines, my work, made her look elsewhere? I didn't know, and that not knowing was the hardest part. I tried to reach her, gently at first. Are you okay? I would ask, waiting for her to tell me about her day, her thoughts, her worries. She would smile, nod, maybe even laugh softly, but there was always a slight pause before she spoke, a hesitation that I couldn't ignore. I'm fine, she would say, but her eyes looked somewhere else, distant, and it broke something in me every time. Some nights, I would sit on the edge of our bed, watching her sleep, listening to the soft rise and fall of her breath. I would imagine the conversations she might be having in her mind, the thoughts she held close to herself, and the part of her heart that wasn't mine. I hated myself for feeling both anger and pity. I wanted to shout at her, demand answers, accuse her of betrayal. But I also wanted to comfort her, to hold her and remind her that I loved her more than anyone else ever could. Our home, once a sanctuary, became a landscape of tension. Simple routines, breakfast, laundry, dishes, errands, became exercises in emotional navigation. I found myself thinking twice before asking a question, choosing my words carefully to avoid conflict. Even when we spoke casually, I could feel the distance in her tone. One evening, I asked quietly, almost tentatively, "Is there something you want to tell me?" She looked up from her book, eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing her options. "I don't think so," she said softly. "Why do you ask?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I don't know. I just feel like maybe there's something you're holding back." Her lips pressed together, her hand pausing on the page of the book. I could see the inner conflict in her eyes, the hesitation, the restraint, the battle between truth and protection. "Nothing," she whispered finally, and then returned to her book, closing off that conversation like a door shutting between us. I started noticing other things too, the way her laughter at my jokes was delayed, forced at times, the way she glanced at her phone more often, the way she would disappear into our bedroom with no explanation. I tried not to jump to conclusions, to give her space, to trust the woman I had loved for over a decade. But trust felt fragile now, delicate as glass, trembling under the weight of uncertainty. I began reflecting on the small arguments we had had over the past year. The time I forgot our anniversary. The dinner I skipped because of work. The day I snapped at her over something trivial. Each of these moments, which I had brushed off as minor, suddenly appeared in a new light. Could they have been the first cracks in her heart? Could my carelessness, even if unintentional, have pushed her towards someone else? One rainy afternoon, I found myself standing by the window, staring at the droplets sliding down the glass. She was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared lunch. I wanted to reach out, to speak, to say something that would close the growing gap between us. But every word I imagined sounded hollow, inadequate. I realized that the space between us wasn't just physical. It was emotional, almost like we were existing in two separate worlds under the same roof. I started keeping small notes for myself, jotting down the moments that didn't feel right. The subtle changes in tone, the way she avoided eye contact, the way she smiled without reaching her eyes. I wasn't keeping evidence. I wasn't planning anything. I just needed to remind myself of the truth that my heart feared. Things were changing, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, our son, our 12-year-old boy, who had always been the light of our home, came to me with a frown. "Dad, do you ever think Mom is distant?" he asked quietly, like he was afraid to say it aloud. I froze. My heart ached at the thought that even he could sense it. I knelt beside him, trying to keep my own feelings in check. "Sometimes, buddy," I said gently. "But we all have days like that, right? Days when we feel a little far away." He nodded slowly, but the frown didn't leave his face. "She talks a lot on her phone. I hear her whispering sometimes." "I don't know." The words landed like stones in my chest. I thanked him softly and told him to come to me if he ever felt worried. But inside, a storm was brewing. Even our child could sense the distance, the tension, and I knew that if we didn't address it soon, it would grow, becoming something impossible to fix. Days turned into weeks, and the rising tension began to erode our routines. The quiet dinners, once filled with small talk and laughter, became silent meals. We would sit across from each other, fork in hand, sharing food but not stories, sharing space but not hearts. Sometimes, I would reach across the table, lightly touching her hand, and she would pull away subtly, her smile polite but distant. I started doubting myself constantly. Was I imagining things? Was I overreacting? I wanted to believe she still loved me, that this was just a rough patch, that we could return to the life we had built. But the evidence, small and quiet as it was, kept accumulating. The whispers I thought I had heard that night replayed endlessly in my mind. The name I couldn't forget. One evening, I decided to ask her again. I tried to speak without accusation, without anger, only calm curiosity. "I feel like there's something between us that we're not talking about. Can we just talk?" Her eyes softened briefly, but then she looked away. "I don't know if I can," she said quietly. "It's complicated." I wanted to press, to ask for clarity, but I realized that pushing her might only make things worse. I nodded slowly, my chest tight. "Okay," I said, "but I hope we will. I need to understand, and I hope you do too." Weeks passed with small gestures of affection, polite smiles, and careful words. But beneath the surface, the tension was constant. I could feel her attention drifting, even when we were in the same room. I could feel my own anxiety growing, creeping into my thoughts and my actions, affecting how I interacted with our son, with friends, even at work. One rainy night, I found myself sitting alone in the living room. The house was quiet except for the steady sound of the rain against the windows. I traced the outline of a photograph of our wedding, remembering the way we had looked at each other, the love in our eyes, the sense of certainty and safety. I whispered to the empty room, "I don't want to lose this. I can't lose this." It was around this time that I noticed something else. Little habits she had, once endearing, now felt like barriers. The way she checked her phone obsessively, the way she laughed softly at messages I couldn't see, the way she sometimes left the room abruptly without explanation. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck. Instead, I started documenting everything in my mind, every small sign, every unusual glance, every unanswered question. I wasn't spying, at least not in the malicious sense. I was trying to understand, trying to make sense of the growing distance. And the more I observed, the heavier the weight on my chest became. One night, I heard the whisper again. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. "I can't wait to see you, David." That was it. There was no room for doubt anymore. My heart sank, but I did not react immediately. I stood in the hallway, letting the words echo inside me, letting the truth settle slowly like a stone. I realized, painfully, that I could no longer ignore what was happening. The tension that had been building over weeks, over months, had reached its peak. I knew then that confrontation was inevitable. That silence, careful observation, and gentle questions were no longer enough. I had to face the reality of our marriage, the choices she had made, and the choices I had unknowingly allowed through my own distractions and complacency. The next morning, I woke with a strange calm. The anxiety was still there, the ache in my chest still present, but I felt ready. Ready to face her, to ask the questions I had been holding back, to step into the conversation that would change everything. And that's when I realized, sometimes, the rising conflict is not about anger or shouting. It is about quiet recognition, about seeing the truth clearly, about letting your heart feel the pain it needs to feel before any conversation can begin. It is about preparing yourself, emotionally, for the moment when everything you believed will be challenged. I had spent weeks living in quiet anxiety, moving through our house like a ghost, observing, reflecting, and bracing myself for what I already feared. And then it happened, the moment I had tried to prepare for, but could never truly anticipate. It was late evening. The kind of night when the world is muted, the streetlights casting soft golden pools on the wet pavement outside. Our son had gone to bed, and the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. I was in the living room, flipping through an old photo album, pretending to be absorbed, when I heard it again. Her voice. Not a whisper this time, but clear, deliberate, intimate. "I can't wait to see you, David." My chest tightened, and the photo album slipped from my hands. It thudded softly on the carpet, a sound that seemed almost irrelevant compared to the storm that had just landed inside me. I felt my knees weaken, the air in my lungs thickening as though I couldn't draw a full breath. I didn't run, didn't confront her immediately. I just stood there, listening, letting the words burn into my mind. And then I heard it again, a laugh, soft and private, the kind of laugh we had once shared between just the two of us, now directed at someone else. That's when I realized the truth. She wasn't hiding anything anymore. This was real. This wasn't a fleeting thought or a passing emotion. She had already chosen, in heart and mind, someone else. And I was left standing on the outside of a life I had believed was ours. I remember walking toward the kitchen, every step deliberate, yet trembling slightly. I wanted to see, to hear, to understand, even though I knew the sight would crush me. And there she was, holding her phone, smiling softly as she typed messages I would never see. My name, the name of the person she whispered, it was there, written in my mind forever now. I didn't say a word at first. I just watched. I let myself feel the full weight of betrayal, the ache that went beyond anger and sadness. This was grief. Grief for the life I thought we shared, for the years of laughter, trust, and love that I had invested fully and believed fully. And now, it was gone, quietly, almost invisibly, but completely. I remember the first words I spoke, barely above a whisper, almost afraid they would shatter the fragile moment. "Who is David?" She looked up at me, her eyes widening slightly, a flicker of guilt, or maybe just hesitation, crossing her face. "It's nothing. I didn't mean for you to hear that. she said softly. I shook my head slowly. Nothing? You've been whispering his name at night, smiling at messages in secret. How is that nothing? She didn't answer immediately. She looked down, biting her lip, and I could feel the distance between us stretch wider than ever before. I didn't know how to tell you, she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. It just happened. I didn't plan it. The words hit me like a punch. Not because of the act itself, but because of the quiet inevitability in them. She didn't plan it, but it had happened, and I had missed it. Every missed signal, every subtle change, every quiet withdrawal had been a sign, and I had been blind. I felt my body sag under the weight of it all. I wanted to scream, to demand explanations, to shake the truth out of her like water from a wet cloth. But no words came. Instead, a strange numbness settled over me, the kind that comes when your heart is breaking slowly, steadily, and you realize that the person you trusted most has stepped away from the life you shared without a glance back. We sat in silence for what felt like hours. The rain against the windows, the soft hum of the heater, even the occasional creak of the house. All of it sounded louder now, sharper. It was as if the world around us recognized the rupture that had occurred, the invisible fracture in a life I thought was unshakable. Finally, I whispered, almost to myself, "How long?" She looked at me, tears glistening in her eyes. "A few months," she said quietly. "I didn't know how to stop it, and I didn't want to hurt you. I tried to ignore it, but it's too late now." The words were like ice sliding into my chest. I could feel every heartbeat as a reminder of everything that had gone wrong, every shared memory now tinged with loss. I wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come immediately. First, there was only emptiness, a hollow space where love used to live. I thought about our son, our life together, every plan we had made for the future, vacations, birthdays, simple dinners, quiet nights. And now, in one quiet revelation, everything had shifted. I realized then that marriage is not just about love, but about choices, daily and constant, and that trust, once broken, cannot be easily rebuilt. She reached for my hand, but I recoiled slightly, not out of anger, but out of the need to protect the fragile pieces of myself. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and I believed her. I could feel the sincerity, the guilt, the confusion, but the sorrow in me was too deep. Words could not fix it. Apologies could not undo months of secrecy, whispers in the night, and smiles meant for someone else. That night, I stayed awake while she slept in the other room. I walked through the house quietly, touching objects we had once cherished together, the coffee mugs, the books, the framed photographs, and feeling the emptiness in them. Each object, each memory, was now a reminder of what I had lost. I thought about confrontation, about anger, about yelling and blaming. But deep down, I knew that would not change anything. The truth had already set in. The fracture was real, and it was permanent, at least for now. Over the following days, I began to see the subtle ways in which betrayal shapes ordinary life. Breakfasts were eaten in silence. Conversations were guarded. Even when we spoke about our son or shared responsibilities, there was a new layer of tension, a quiet acknowledgement that our emotional intimacy had been shattered. I tried to talk, to ask questions that might lead to understanding, to reasons, to explanations. But she could only offer fragments, apologies, and soft admissions. Every answer left me with more questions, more uncertainty, more grief. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in the car alone, parked outside a quiet park. The rain had stopped, leaving a crisp chill in the air. I watched children run and play, families laugh together, and I felt a sharp pang of longing for what I once had. I whispered to myself, why couldn't we stay the same? Why did this happen? And in that moment, I realized the hardest truth. Sometimes, love is not enough. Effort is not always reciprocated. Loyalty can falter. And hearts, no matter how long they have been together, can drift apart quietly, gently, leaving one to pick up the pieces alone. That night, I returned home, walked through the silent house, and sat in the living room. The photograph of our wedding stared at me from the table, a reminder of a love that had existed, even if it no longer did. I whispered her name softly, tears finally coming, and felt the depth of my sorrow. It was a turning point not just in our marriage, but in my life. I had to confront a reality I had been avoiding. The woman I loved was no longer mine alone, and the life we had built together had changed irreversibly. I felt grief, yes, but also a strange clarity. For the first time in weeks, I understood the necessity of facing truth head-on, no matter how painful. And I made a decision to hold myself with dignity, to confront the situation with honesty, and to seek a way forward, whether together or apart. I couldn't control her choices, but I could control my response. I could choose to crumble, or I could choose to endure. The following days were tense, quiet, and fragile. We spoke cautiously, navigating around the elephant in the room. I felt every conversation weigh heavily, knowing that each word could either deepen the wound or begin the slow process of healing. And yet, even in pain, I began to notice subtle shifts, a willingness to answer, to communicate, to acknowledge the hurt we both carried. I began writing, journaling the raw truth of my emotions, pouring out everything I had been holding inside. I wrote about love, betrayal, grief, and confusion. I wrote about hope, even faint hope, that someday we might understand each other again. And in writing, I found a small measure of relief, a way to process the storm raging within me. That was the turning point. The moment I acknowledged that our marriage had changed, that love alone couldn't undo the consequences of choices made in secrecy. But also the moment I began to reclaim my own heart, my own sense of self, and my own capacity for resilience. The days after the revelation were quiet, almost painfully so. Our house no longer felt like a home in the way I had known it. The rooms were filled with the echoes of what had been, yet they were also filled with silence. A heavy, reflective silence that seemed to demand contemplation. Every corner, every object, every memory felt charged with a mixture of love and loss. I would walk past the kitchen, seeing her cup sitting where she always left it, and feel a pang that was both grief and longing. I began to realize that healing would not come in grand gestures or sudden changes. It would come in small moments, quiet realizations, and deliberate choices. The first step was acknowledging that the life I had known was gone, and that clinging to what no longer existed would only deepen the pain. I had to face the truth. Our marriage had fractured, and I could not force it back together. I spent long hours sitting alone in the living room, rain dripping gently against the windows, thinking about all the things I had taken for granted. The laughter, the quiet conversations, the shared routines. All of it had seemed ordinary, but now I understood how precious it had been. I had loved blindly, with complete trust, and now I was learning that trust can be both fragile and enduring. Fragile in the moment of betrayal, enduring in the memory of what was real. One morning, I woke early and made coffee for myself. The sun was barely rising, casting a soft golden light across the kitchen. I sat at the table, holding my cup, feeling the warmth seep into my hands, and realized that this simple moment was mine. It belonged to me. And in that recognition, I felt the first stirrings of control over my own life. A life that could no longer be defined solely by her choices or our shared past. I began journaling more seriously. Each day, I wrote about my emotions, my fears, my hopes, and my regrets. I wrote about her, about the life we had shared, and about the whispers that had shattered my certainty. Writing allowed me to untangle the complicated web of feelings inside me. It allowed me to speak to someone who could listen without judgment, even if that someone was only the pages of a notebook. Slowly, I started noticing the small things that brought me comfort. A walk in the park, feeling the crisp air on my face. Sitting by the window and watching children play, hearing the distant laughter that reminded me that joy still existed. Cooking a meal for myself, savoring the flavors, and remembering that life continues, even when grief lingers. I reached out to a close friend one afternoon. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind where the hum of conversation is gentle, never overwhelming. I told him everything. The whispers, the moments of doubt, the heartbreak. I cried openly for the first time since the revelation, letting my grief flow freely without restraint. And as he listened, offering no simple solutions but only understanding, I felt a measure of relief. Sharing my pain reminded me that I was not alone in my suffering. Back at home, our interactions became measured, cautious. We spoke politely about our son, about household responsibilities, about schedules and logistics. The warmth and intimacy we had once shared were absent, but the tension had softened slightly. There was no pretending, no forced smiles, only quiet acknowledgement that life must go on. I started taking time for myself in ways I had neglected for years. I returned to hobbies I had abandoned, spent evenings reading books that had been gathering dust, and listened to music that resonated with my emotional state. Each small act of self-care felt revolutionary, a reclaiming of parts of myself that had been submerged in the comfort and routine of marriage. I remember one afternoon, sitting in the garden with our son, teaching him how to plant seeds in the small vegetable patch I had insisted we start last year. He looked up at me, dirt on his hands and a bright smile on his face, and said, "Dad, I'm glad you're here." Those words were a balm to my heart. They reminded me that even in the midst of personal heartbreak, there were connections that mattered, love that endured, and responsibilities that gave life meaning. I realized that my bond with him was unshakable, a source of strength I could draw upon to navigate the more turbulent aspects of my emotional world. One evening, I decided to confront the memories themselves. I took out our wedding album, one of the few objects I had kept untouched, and slowly turned the pages. I allowed myself to remember not just the love, but also the ordinary, mundane moments. The way she brushed my hair back from my forehead, the lazy Sunday mornings, the soft hum of music while we cooked together. I let the memories wash over me without judgment, recognizing that even if our marriage had changed, those moments had been real. Over time, I found myself letting go of anger. I didn't need to forgive her immediately, nor did I have to pretend the betrayal hadn't happened. But I began to understand that carrying bitterness would only prolong my own suffering. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about excusing her actions. It was about freeing myself from the grip of pain, choosing to walk forward with clarity and dignity. I also began to reflect on my own role in the unraveling of our relationship. The long hours at work, the moments of inattentiveness, the times I had failed to listen carefully or nurture our connection. I acknowledged them all, not as a way to blame myself entirely, but to understand the complexity of love and human relationships. I realized that both of us had made choices, and both of us were navigating consequences. This recognition brought a quiet, painful clarity, but also a sense of personal growth. Communication slowly resumed, tentative but real. We began to talk about our son more openly, about his school, his friends, and his hobbies. We shared logistical decisions about our home and finances, establishing a rhythm that, while different from what we had known, was functional and necessary. There were moments of awkwardness, of hesitation, but also small glimpses of the old warmth, a shared laugh, a casual touch, a polite concern that reminded me that connection was still possible, even in the aftermath of betrayal. I started to take long walks alone in the evening, letting the cool air clear my mind. I watched the sunset over quiet streets, feeling the weight of grief lift slightly with each passing day. In these moments, I realized that life is not a straight path. It is a series of ebbs and flows, of losses and recoveries, and that the human heart is capable of resilience beyond what we often imagine. Over months, the sharp pain of betrayal dulled into a persistent ache, a reminder, yes, but one that could coexist with moments of calm and clarity. I began to plan for the future, not a future defined solely by the past, but one in which I had agency, choice, and purpose. I reconnected with old friends, pursued personal interests, and found solace in the simple rhythms of daily life. Our son continued to be my anchor. I watched him grow, celebrated his achievements, comforted him during his struggles, and reveled in the quiet joy of his presence. The love I had for him became a guiding force, a reminder that even when other aspects of life shift and falter, some bonds are unbreakable. I also began to understand the nuanced nature of love. Love is not always possession, control, or constant reassurance. Sometimes, love is endurance, empathy, and acceptance. Sometimes, love is recognizing that people change, that hearts can drift, and that the most meaningful response is to carry oneself with integrity and compassion. I spent one rainy afternoon in the living room, sunlight breaking through the clouds and casting soft light across the floor. I sat quietly, reflecting on the journey from shock, confusion, and grief to understanding, acceptance, and measured hope. I realized that life had changed irrevocably, yes, but that I was still here, whole, capable, and able to create a meaningful existence. I began to rebuild routines that nurtured my well-being. I prepared meals with care, walked with intention, and allowed myself to feel emotions fully without fear or judgment. I found that the quiet moments, a cup of tea by the window, a conversation with a friend, a laugh with my son, were the ones that gradually restored a sense of balance and peace. I also reflected on forgiveness, not as absolution for her actions, but as a gift to myself. Holding on to resentment would only prolong suffering. Releasing it, even in small increments, allowed me to reclaim agency over my emotional life. I forgave, not because the pain was erased, but because I chose to walk forward with grace. Over time, the house felt less like a place of tension and more like a space for life to continue. The rooms no longer echoed solely with grief, but with moments of quiet reflection, laughter, and small gestures of connection. I learned to coexist with memories of betrayal without letting them define my every thought. I started engaging in small acts of kindness for myself and others, a note of encouragement to a friend, helping my son with his homework, volunteering quietly in my community. These acts reminded me that life is not only about pain and loss, but also about contribution, empathy, and connection. I began to imagine a future that was different from the one I had planned, but not devoid of meaning or joy. I realized that healing is a gradual process, a layering of moments, choices, and reflections that eventually create a sense of wholeness. The pain of betrayal remained, but it no longer ruled my life. In quiet moments, I would reflect on the journey I had traveled. From the first whisper, through the days of uncertainty and rising tension, to the moment of full heartbreak, and now to this slow, deliberate process of healing. Each stage had taught me something essential about life, love, and the resilience of the human spirit. I learned that sometimes the greatest acts of courage are not dramatic confrontations, but the quiet persistence of living fully despite pain. I learned that self-reflection, honesty, and emotional integrity are powerful tools for navigating heartbreak. And I learned that love, in its many forms, is worth preserving, whether it manifests in marriage, family, friendship, or the connection we hold with ourselves. Sitting by the window one evening, watching the sun set over the quiet streets, I whispered softly, "I am still here. I am still whole. I can still love and be loved, even in new ways." And in that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known for months, a calm acceptance of life's impermanence, its beauty, and its capacity for renewal. The mornings have changed now. I wake to quiet sunlight spilling across the living room floor, gentle and unhurried, not demanding, not threatening. The house no longer carries the weight of whispered names or hidden messages. Instead, it hums with the rhythm of life, soft, persistent, unassuming. I sit with a cup of coffee, feeling the warmth seep into my hands, and I realize that even grief, even heartbreak, can become part of a calm routine. I think often about love, what it means, how it manifests, and how easily it can falter when one is unprepared. For a long time, I believed love was enough. I believed that caring deeply, showing up, and committing yourself entirely could shield a relationship from the trials of life. I was wrong. Love alone is not enough. Love requires constant attention, reflection, and sometimes even courage to step back and see what is real, rather than what you wish to be true. I've spent countless nights reflecting on our marriage, on her choices, and on my own. I've asked myself the same questions 1,000 times. Could I have done more? Should I have noticed sooner? Did my work, my routines, my sense of certainty blind me to the distance that was quietly growing between us? These questions do not have easy answers, and I've learned that part of moving forward is letting go of the need for perfect understanding. Some truths must simply be accepted. Acceptance does not come suddenly. It arrives in small increments. In the way you notice sunlight through the window, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the sound of your son's laughter echoing down the hall. Acceptance comes when you allow yourself to feel, fully and deeply, without trying to suppress or escape the pain. I've cried more in these months than I have in years. I've felt the raw ache of betrayal, the quiet sorrow of shattered trust, and the lingering fear of losing someone I loved. And yet, each tear, each pang of grief, has brought me closer to a place of clarity. I've learned that grief is not linear. Some days, the pain is sharp and sudden, like the first night I heard her whisper another name. Other days, it is soft and almost imperceptible, lingering in the background, like a shadow that moves with the light. Both are necessary. Both remind you that life is not simply about happiness, but about feeling deeply, being present, and learning to navigate your emotions without being consumed by them. One of the most important lessons I've learned is the power of reflection. I've spent hours alone, journaling, walking, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, thinking about all the choices I've made, all the moments I have shared, and all the moments I have missed. Reflection is not regret. At least, it doesn't have to be. It is a tool for understanding, a way to see patterns, behaviors, and emotions more clearly. I reflect not to punish myself, but to learn, to grow, to ensure that I do not repeat the same mistakes, and that I approach the future with more wisdom than I carried before. My son has been my anchor. Watching him navigate the world, hearing his thoughts, seeing his laughter, and even his frustrations has reminded me that life continues, even after betrayal. His love is constant, unshakable, and pure. He does not carry the weight of adult disappointment, and in that, I find a lesson. The heart of a child holds simplicity and truth. In his presence, I have found the courage to face my own emotions honestly, without hiding or deflecting, and to embrace both sorrow and hope simultaneously. I've started noticing the quiet beauty in ordinary moments. A cup of coffee in the early morning light, the soft hum of rain against the window, the way leaves move in a gentle breeze, or the distant sound of children playing. These moments, small and fleeting, have become reminders that life, even in its sorrow, contains beauty. They teach patience, presence, and a deep gratitude for the simple rhythm of living. There is also a recognition now that relationships are a reflection of human complexity. My wife's choices, painful as they were, reveal the subtle ways in which hearts drift and change. They do not necessarily erase the love that once existed, nor do they diminish the shared experiences that shaped us. Instead, they demonstrate that people are complicated, that love and loyalty are sometimes imperfect, and that understanding these truths is essential to moving forward without bitterness. I have begun to forgive, not for her sake, not to erase the past, but for my own. Forgiveness has a quiet power. It does not deny the pain, nor does it excuse the choices that caused it. Instead, it frees you from carrying anger and resentment like a constant weight. I forgive her, and in doing so, I reclaim parts of myself that were trapped in sorrow, guilt, and confusion. Forgiveness allows me to exist fully in the present, rather than being tethered to the echoes of betrayal. At times, I still feel the ache. Some days, it emerges without warning, a word, a memory, a glance that reminds me of what has changed, and I allow myself to feel it. I don't suppress it or pretend it doesn't exist. I let the pain move through me, like water flowing around stones in a river. And gradually, it softens, becoming less sharp, more manageable, and eventually, it fades into a quiet awareness rather than an overwhelming force. I have also begun to understand the subtle ways in which resilience grows. Resilience is not about pretending to be strong at all times. It is about allowing yourself to feel deeply, to process fully, and then to choose life, to engage with it actively rather than retreating. It is about understanding that the heart can mend in layers, and that each layer, though delicate, contributes to a stronger, wiser self. One afternoon, I found myself in our living room, sun streaming through the windows, listening to the distant laughter of my son outside. I realized that I had come a long way from the nights of quiet despair, the heavy weight of whispered names, and the constant anxiety about the unknown. I had survived. More than that, I had grown. I had learned patience, empathy, reflection, and the importance of self-love. I began thinking about the nature of love in a broader sense. Love is not a single, fixed thing. It evolves, shifts, and sometimes ends in ways we cannot predict or control. But love also persists, in memory, in small acts of kindness, in the care we give to others, and in the strength we cultivate within ourselves. Even when romantic love changes or disappears, the capacity to love remains, intact and ready for new expressions. I started rebuilding routines that nourished my spirit. I returned to hobbies I had neglected, pursued interests that had once brought joy, and allowed myself to spend quiet evenings in reflection or reading. These moments became sacred, a gentle reminder that even when life shifts unexpectedly, we can create spaces of peace, stability, and comfort within ourselves. The house, once a symbol of tension and pain, slowly transformed into a space of reflection and calm. Each room, each corner, carried the imprint of past memories, but also the potential for new ones. I could exist in it fully, without being haunted constantly by loss. I could create moments of connection with my son, moments of clarity for myself, and moments of quiet contemplation that reminded me that life continues. Always, relentlessly, and sometimes beautifully. I learned to navigate conversations with my wife with measured calm. We spoke carefully about our son, about household matters, and occasionally about shared memories. The intimacy we once had did not return in the same way, and I did not expect it to. But we learned to coexist with honesty, respect, and shared responsibility. Even in altered relationships, dignity and clarity are possible, and sometimes that is enough. As the days continued, I began noticing the subtler patterns of life, the moments that had once gone unnoticed, the small gestures that quietly reminded me that healing was possible. A neighbor greeting me with a soft smile, my son running toward me with a book to share, the distant hum of birds waking up with the sun. All of it became a gentle reminder that even after loss, life moves forward, and so must we. I realized that grief is not something to rush or escape. It is a teacher, though often a cruel one. It forces you to confront the fragility of love, the impermanence of trust, and the quiet truths we often avoid acknowledging. I had spent so many years believing that devotion alone could safeguard relationships, that consistency could prevent heartbreak. But I learned that life is unpredictable, and that love, though vital, does not guarantee permanence. Sitting in quiet reflection one evening, I began to speak to myself in ways I hadn't allowed before. I acknowledged my mistakes, the moments of inattentiveness, the times I took her for granted, the hours lost to work and distraction. I did not dwell in self-recrimination, but I embraced a clarity that only honesty can bring. Understanding my own role in the unfolding of events gave me a sense of agency, a reminder that while I could not change the past, I could shape how I moved forward. The hardest truth I confronted was the nature of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not about condoning wrongs. It is not about minimizing the pain caused. It is about reclaiming your own life from the hold of resentment. I began the slow work of forgiving, for her, for myself, and for the life we once shared that had now changed irreversibly. Each small act of forgiveness felt like a release, a lightening of the burden I had carried since the first whispered name reached my ears. I also began to see beauty in imperfection. The house, once a silent witness to tension, now held traces of both past love and new resilience. The worn couch, where we had once laughed, now hosted quiet reading afternoons with my son. The kitchen, once a space of silent arguments, became a place of measured meals, shared laughter, and reflection. Even ordinary routines, when approached with intention, held a kind of sacredness I had never recognized before. Over time, I began to trust myself again. The heartbreak had left me cautious, wary of vulnerability, but it also offered the opportunity to rebuild emotional boundaries. I learned that trust, whether in others or in oneself, must be nurtured slowly and deliberately. I could feel the strength returning, quiet but firm, like roots extending deep into soil that had once been shaken by storms. I noticed that my son's laughter had a way of grounding me. He had no concept of betrayal or whispered secrets. To him, life was immediate, bright, and full of small joys. Observing him reminded me that resilience often grows from simplicity, that strength can exist in laughter, play, and connection. I found myself leaning into these moments, allowing their light to permeate the corners of my heart that had been darkened by pain. One afternoon, I walked to the park with him. The crisp air smelled of earth and rain, the sun glimmering off wet grass. He ran ahead, laughing, and I followed at a slower pace, breathing in the serenity of the moment. I realized then that healing is not a single act, but a journey, one that unfolds in small, deliberate steps. The path is quiet, often unremarkable, yet profoundly transformative if approached with intention. I began thinking about love in a broader sense. Love is not always about possession or exclusivity or permanence. It is about connection, understanding, and the courage to engage fully despite the risks. Love endures in memory, in empathy, and in the care we extend to others and to ourselves. Even when romantic love shifts or fades, the capacity for love remains strong, adaptable, and ever-present. I found solace in writing letters, though I never sent them. I wrote to my past self, to my future self, to my son, and even to her. In these letters, I expressed my grief, my hope, my regrets, and my lessons learned. Writing became a bridge, a quiet way to navigate the complexity of emotions without being overwhelmed. The letters were my companions, my confessions, my reminders that expression itself is a form of healing. Evenings became my sacred time. I would sit by the window, a cup of tea in hand, listening to the soft rain or the distant hum of traffic. I observed the world quietly, letting thoughts drift freely, allowing memories to surface without clinging to them. I learned that peace is not the absence of pain, but the coexistence of reflection and acceptance, sorrow and clarity. I also began to notice the small ways in which life offers unexpected grace. A stranger's kindness, a friend's encouragement, a quiet moment of beauty in nature. These moments accumulated, teaching me that even after betrayal, the world retains its capacity for tenderness and light. It reminded me that pain is only part of life, not the entirety of it. Over time, my interactions with my wife became more measured and intentional. We spoke about our son, about household matters, and occasionally about shared memories. The warmth we once had did not return in the same way, but we established a rhythm of honesty and respect. I realized that relationships, even altered ones, can still carry dignity and understanding. Connection can survive change, even if intimacy evolves differently than expected. I began to embrace solitude not as loneliness, but as a form of strength. I walked alone in quiet streets, feeling the chill of the evening air, listening to the distant sounds of life. In solitude, I found clarity, reflection, and a deepening sense of self. I began to understand that being alone does not mean being abandoned. It can mean being present with yourself, your emotions, and your own capacity for growth. One particularly quiet evening, I watched my son asleep in his bed. The room was dim, moonlight spilling across his features, soft and serene. I traced the contours of his face with my gaze, thinking about how much he had taught me, about resilience, about joy, about the unyielding presence of love. His innocence, his trust, and his quiet strength reminded me that life continues to offer opportunities for connection, for love, and for hope. I began to let go of expectations, understanding that life rarely unfolds according to plan. I released the desire to control outcomes, to force reconciliation, or to reclaim what had changed. Instead, I focused on what was within my reach, my own healing, my own growth, and my own ability to cultivate joy, even in altered circumstances. I noticed that small rituals carried immense weight. A morning walk, a shared meal, a brief conversation with my son, the act of preparing tea just so, all became anchors, grounding me in the present, reminding me that life continues, and that each day carries the potential for meaning, beauty, and calm. As months passed, the sharp ache of betrayal dulled into a persistent but manageable awareness. It was like carrying a stone in my pocket, always present, but no longer dictating every movement or thought. I learned that grief does not disappear, but it can be integrated into life, informing but not controlling it. I also reflected on the complexity of human behavior. People make choices, sometimes painful ones, based on factors we may never fully understand. Acceptance does not mean agreement, but it allows for coexistence with reality without being consumed by it. This understanding has given me a sense of calm that was previously unimaginable. Time has a quiet way of teaching lessons we are not ready to learn in the moment. The days stretch, one into another, often imperceptibly, and yet beneath the surface, transformation occurs. I have learned to notice this subtle flow, to observe how grief softens, how love endures in different forms, and how the heart, though scarred, continues to expand in unexpected ways. I think often about impermanence. The life we believed unshakable, the marriage, the routines, the sense of certainty, all of it proved transient. And yet, I have discovered that impermanence is not only a source of grief, it is also a source of profound beauty. Each moment, each interaction, each gesture carries meaning precisely because it is fleeting. The sunsets, the laughter of my son, the quiet smiles exchanged across the living room. These moments gain depth when we understand that nothing lasts forever. Fatherhood has become my anchor more than ever. I watch him grow, learning and experimenting, stumbling and triumphing, and I am reminded that presence matters more than perfection. The love I offer him is steady, patient, and intentional. I have learned that to be a father is to provide constancy in a world that is always shifting, to be the one who listens, who guides, who holds even when the heart aches. He has taught me as much as I have taught him, about patience, about joy, about the resilience of the human spirit. I found myself returning to long walks, sometimes alone, sometimes with him. The streets we traverse are familiar, yet each walk carries its own meaning. On quiet evenings, the faint smell of rain, the subtle whisper of wind through the trees, the distant sound of a train moving along the tracks, all of it becomes a backdrop for reflection. These walks remind me that life is continuous, and that even when we encounter pain, there are moments of grace waiting to be observed and embraced. I have grown more intentional in my relationships, learning that clarity and honesty are more sustaining than routine or expectation. I no longer take for granted the people who choose to remain present, nor do I cling to those who have drifted. This is not bitterness or resignation. It is a quiet acknowledgement that life is composed of layers of connection, and that some relationships endure in form and others in memory, each teaching lessons unique to its nature. In the stillness of the evenings, I often meditate on the nature of trust. Trust is delicate, yet resilient. It can be broken, but it can also be rebuilt, slowly, deliberately, with attention and care. I have learned to trust myself again, to listen to my own instincts, and to honor my emotional boundaries. This internal trust forms the foundation for all external connections, ensuring that my heart is not offered blindly, but thoughtfully, with discernment and courage. I think often about forgiveness, not the dramatic kind that is announced publicly or proclaimed loudly, but the quiet, private kind that restores peace to one's own heart. I forgive, not to erase the past, but to release the weight of it. I forgive, not to condone, but to reclaim my own capacity for calm, for reflection, and for love. In this forgiveness, I discover freedom, a freedom that allows me to engage fully with the present without being tethered to sorrow. There are moments, still, when grief surfaces unexpectedly. A song on the radio, a photograph, a phrase in a conversation, and suddenly, the heart tightens, the memories press in, and the ache returns. And yet, I no longer fear these moments. I allow them to exist, understanding that grief is part of the human experience. It is a reminder of depth, of connection, of love that was once vibrant and is still remembered. Each resurgence teaches me patience, empathy, and the enduring capacity to feel. I have begun to appreciate silence in ways I never did before. Silence is not emptiness. It is space. A space for reflection, for understanding, for listening to the subtle truths that life offers when we slow down enough to hear them. In silence, I have learned to observe the rhythms of my own heart, to notice the nuances of emotion, and to find peace in the unspoken. My son continues to teach me the value of curiosity and wonder. He notices the tiny details, a ladybug crawling across the sidewalk, the pattern of frost on the window, the way sunlight shifts across the floor. Through him, I am reminded to slow down, to witness the world with openness, and to carry gratitude for the ordinary moments that contain extraordinary significance. I have started to envision a future that is different from the one I once planned, yet rich with possibility. The outlines of that future are not rigid. They are flexible, allowing room for growth, for joy, and for connection. I no longer cling to the illusion of control. Instead, I engage actively with life, embracing opportunities, nurturing relationships, and cultivating resilience with deliberate care. There is a quiet satisfaction in self-reliance, not the kind born of isolation, but of understanding one's own capacity to navigate challenges. I have discovered that I am capable of deep love, profound reflection, and patient endurance. I am capable of creating moments of joy and comfort, even in the absence of what was lost. This realization brings a profound sense of empowerment, not arrogance, but grounded assurance in the strength of my own heart. I often reflect on the nature of heartbreak itself. Heartbreak is not the end of love. It is the beginning of understanding. It teaches perspective, empathy, and the resilience that only experience can provide. The ache that once seemed unbearable now feels like a companion, a reminder that life is lived fully, with both joy and sorrow, with both connection and solitude. I have learned to cultivate gratitude, even for pain. Gratitude does not mean minimizing suffering, but acknowledging that every experience, every heartbreak, every moment of challenge contributes to the shape of who we become. I am grateful for lessons learned, for resilience gained, for the capacity to feel deeply, and for the enduring love I carry for my son, for friends, and for the life that continues to unfold before me. There are mornings now when I wake and feel a quiet peace that would have been unimaginable months ago. The world has not changed, the challenges of life remain. But I have changed. My perception, my resilience, my understanding of love and connection, all of it has deepened. I can hold sorrow and joy simultaneously, and I have learned that these emotions, layered and interwoven, create the richness of a fully experienced life. I have begun to teach my son about the nuances of human emotion, the importance of empathy, and the quiet courage required to navigate life with integrity. I do not shield him from pain, but I show him how to face it, process it, and grow from it. In teaching him, I reinforce these lessons for myself, a constant cycle of reflection, understanding, and emotional development. The house itself has transformed into a sanctuary of quiet reflection. The familiar objects, the worn furniture, the photographs, and mementos now coexist with new memories, small acts of care, laughter shared with my son, moments of introspection, and quiet evenings of solitude. Each corner holds a story, a lesson, and a reminder of the human capacity for adaptation and renewal. I have learned that life's most profound lessons often arrive in subtle ways. A gentle smile, a quiet conversation, the sound of a distant train, the shifting light through the window. All of these moments remind me that healing, growth, and understanding are processes that unfold gradually, demanding patience, presence, and intention. Even in altered relationships, I have discovered the possibility of respect, civility, and shared responsibility. My interactions with my wife are measured but honest, practical but mindful. There is no expectation of rekindled intimacy, only acknowledgement that life continues, responsibilities remain, and the capacity for human kindness endures. Over the months, I have come to appreciate the subtlety of life in ways I never could before. The days that once seemed ordinary now carry weight, as if each moment is a thread woven into the fabric of understanding. I notice how the sunlight falls across the living room in the morning, how the wind whispers through the trees outside, and how small acts of kindness ripple quietly through the world. These observations, once ignored in the rush of daily life, now feel sacred, grounding me in the present and reminding me that even after heartbreak, beauty persists. I've also begun to see the profound value of patience. In our culture, there is often pressure for instant resolution, for immediate clarity, for rapid healing. But emotional recovery does not operate on a timetable. Grief, understanding, forgiveness, all require time, gentle attention, and repetition. I have learned to honor the pace of my own heart, allowing it to move through each stage of emotion without forcing closure or pretending to be okay before I truly am. One morning, my son tugged at my sleeve, pointing to a small bird perched on the windowsill. "Look, Dad," he said. "It's singing." And it was. The delicate trill cut through the quiet of the morning, fragile yet unwavering. I watched him smile, marveling at something so small and yet so beautiful, and I realized that life continues to offer moments of grace even in the shadow of past sorrow. It reminded me that wonder and healing are inseparable. One nourishes the other. I have reflected often on human imperfection, both in myself and in others. We stumble, we falter, we fail, yet there is an enduring strength in our capacity to try again. I have come to understand that betrayal, heartbreak, and loss are not signs of weakness or failure, but evidence of our investment in love, in relationships, and in life itself. Pain is not proof of inadequacy. It is proof that we have cared deeply and that our hearts remain alive. Silence has become a companion I no longer fear. I sit quietly, sometimes in the living room, sometimes in the garden, and allow myself to simply exist. In those moments, I notice the rhythm of my own breath, the subtle sounds of life around me, the distant echo of my son playing. I have learned that silence is not emptiness. It is a space for reflection, for understanding, for nurturing the self, and for acknowledging that the world continues in its own quiet, persistent way. I have also begun to appreciate the complexity of forgiveness more deeply. Forgiveness is not a single act, nor a destination. It is a continuous process of choosing peace over resentment, understanding over bitterness, and freedom over the chains of past pain. I forgive not to forget, but to reclaim my own heart from the grip of sorrow. In this act, I discover a profound sense of agency, the realization that my emotional life is mine to shape, regardless of the choices others have made. I have noticed a subtle but significant change in my perspective on love. Love is not only about possession or permanence. It is about connection, empathy, and the courage to engage fully despite uncertainty. Love persists, even when the form it takes shifts or fades. It lives in memory, in acts of care, in laughter shared with a child, in quiet acknowledgement of beauty in the world. Love endures in ways we often cannot anticipate, teaching resilience, empathy, and understanding. My relationship with my son has deepened in ways I could not have imagined. The bond we share has become a refuge, a source of joy, and a continuous reminder of what matters most. Through him, I have learned patience, empathy, and the enduring value of presence. His curiosity, his wonder, his unfiltered reactions to life teach me daily that the simplest moments often carry the most profound lessons. I have started writing letters again, though these remain unsent. I write to my future self, to my past self, to my son, to the people I have loved and lost. In these letters, I pour out reflections, gratitude, lessons learned, and hopes for what lies ahead. Writing allows me to articulate thoughts that might otherwise remain tangled, to confront emotions honestly, and to nurture understanding within myself. Each letter is a step toward clarity, a way to engage deeply with life without being consumed by it. Evenings have become sacred. I sit quietly, watching the last rays of sunlight fade across the floor, listening to the distant hum of life outside, and feeling the subtle rhythm of my own heart. In these moments, I reflect on the journey from shock and betrayal to understanding and acceptance. I recall the nights of quiet despair, the ache that seemed unending, and the whisper of another name that once shattered certainty. And I see now how far I have come, not because the pain disappeared, but because I learned to carry it with grace. I have come to understand that resilience is not a sudden burst of strength, but a slow, deliberate cultivation of endurance, reflection, and emotional honesty. It is the decision to rise each day, to feel, to reflect, to love, and to move forward, even when uncertainty looms. Resilience is quiet, unglamorous, and profoundly necessary. It is the anchor that keeps the heart steady amid the shifting tides of life. I have also reflected on the impermanence of relationships, understanding that not all love lasts in the form we expect. People change, circumstances shift, and hearts can drift apart. Acceptance of this reality is not surrender, it is liberation. It allows us to carry the love we experienced with dignity, to honor what was real, and to engage with life fully without being trapped by longing or regret. In my walks through the neighborhood, I have noticed small moments of connection. A friendly nod from a passerby, a brief conversation with a neighbor, the laughter of children playing in the distance. These moments remind me that life is composed of countless small interactions, each carrying significance, each offering opportunities for kindness, empathy, and understanding. Even after heartbreak, these connections endure, quietly sustaining the spirit. I have also spent time reflecting on my own personal growth. The heartbreak taught me patience, self-reflection, and the value of honesty with oneself. I have become more attentive to my own needs, more deliberate in my choices, and more compassionate toward both myself and others. Growth is often subtle, cumulative, and uncelebrated, but it is profound in its impact. I have learned to cherish ordinary moments, preparing a meal, listening to the wind through the trees, reading a book, sharing a smile with my son. These moments, seemingly insignificant, carry the weight of meaning precisely because they are fleeting and authentic. They remind me that life is not only about grand gestures or dramatic events, but about presence, mindfulness, and the ability to find beauty in the everyday. I have also begun to embrace imperfection, in myself, in others, and in life itself. The world is rarely fair or predictable, yet it offers countless opportunities for growth, connection, and joy. By accepting imperfection, I free myself from unrealistic expectations, allowing space for compassion, understanding, and genuine connection. As months turn into years, I notice a deepening sense of calm. The pain that once dominated my thoughts has softened into awareness. Memories remain, but they no longer dictate my emotions. Grief exists alongside joy, sorrow alongside laughter, reflection alongside action. Life is not perfect, but it is alive, and that awareness brings a quiet contentment that feels like peace. I have also come to understand the importance of teaching by example. My son observes my responses to challenge, my approach to healing, my ability to carry grief without allowing it to define me. In modeling resilience, patience, and empathy, I hope to give him the tools to navigate life's complexities with courage and grace. This realization, more than any other, has brought meaning and purpose to my days. I have learned that life is rarely linear. It does not follow a predictable path, nor does it honor the timelines we set in our minds. The journey through heartbreak, loss, and eventual healing has taught me that life moves in layers, sometimes softly, sometimes with sharp clarity, but always with purpose if we are willing to observe and reflect. I wake now with a sense of quiet anticipation rather than dread. The morning sunlight filters through the curtains, casting gentle patterns across the floor. I notice the sound of birds outside, the distant hum of traffic, the subtle warmth of a cup of tea in my hands. These simple observations, once mundane, now carry meaning. They remind me that life continues, relentlessly, patiently, and often beautifully. My relationship with my son has grown into a source of profound joy and grounding. I watch him navigate the world with curiosity, resilience, and unfiltered emotion. I see him stumble, succeed, and explore, and I am reminded that presence matters more than perfection. The lessons I share with him, patience, empathy, courage, are mirrored back to me, reinforcing the growth I have cultivated in myself. In teaching him, I teach myself as well. I have also come to understand the nature of love in its many forms. Love is not simply possession, permanence, or comfort. It is connection, vulnerability, empathy, and courage. Love persists in memory, in shared laughter, in the act of caring deeply despite uncertainty. Even when romantic love fades or changes form, love remains, flexible, enduring, and transformative. Over time, I have learned to let go of expectations, to release the illusion of control, and to embrace the unpredictability of life. This release has not been easy. It took months of reflection, journaling, long walks, and quiet conversations with myself. But gradually, I understood that the only thing I could control was my response, my choices, my perspective, and the way I allow experiences to shape me. I have embraced solitude as a form of strength. Being alone does not mean being abandoned. It means presence with oneself, an opportunity to observe thoughts and emotions without judgment, and a chance to cultivate inner resilience. In solitude, I have discovered clarity, empathy, and a deeper understanding of both my own heart and the hearts of others. There are moments, of course, when memories resurface, a song, a photograph, a phrase that brings a familiar ache. But these moments no longer dictate my existence. They are reminders of what was. not definitions of who I am or who I can become. I carry the memories gently, allowing them to exist without being consumed by them. Forgiveness has been a quiet revolution in my life. I forgive not to absolve others, not to erase the past, but to reclaim my own peace. Forgiveness allows me to move forward without carrying bitterness, and it opens space for clarity, understanding, and emotional freedom. Through forgiveness, I have discovered the resilience of the human spirit, the capacity to grow, and the possibility of renewed hope. I have learned that healing is not instantaneous. It is a gradual, layered process. It grows in moments of reflection, in small acts of self-care, in laughter shared with loved ones, and in the quiet acceptance of what cannot be changed. Healing is not perfection. It is presence, awareness, and intentionality. I have also observed the quiet beauty of ordinary moments. The sound of rain against the window, the warmth of sunlight on my face, the laughter of my son playing outside. These small experiences carry immense significance. They remind me that life is composed of countless fleeting moments, each offering an opportunity for gratitude, joy, and connection. My perspective on relationships has deepened. I have learned that not all love lasts in the form we expect, that people grow and change, and that connection can endure in memory, respect, or shared purpose. Acceptance of this reality has brought freedom, allowing me to engage fully in life without clinging to what cannot remain. I have returned to routines that nurture my spirit: reading, journaling, quiet walks, mindful observation, and engagement with the world in ways that bring calm and clarity. Each routine, each small act, strengthens my resilience and reinforces the understanding that life is continuous, even amid sorrow. Through all of this, I have come to embrace the full spectrum of human emotion: grief, joy, fear, love, regret, and hope. Each has its place. Each teaches something vital, and each contributes to the depth of a life fully lived. I have learned that embracing emotion fully, rather than suppressing it, is essential to growth and to the cultivation of resilience. I reflect often on the lessons my journey has taught me. I have learned that love is fragile yet enduring, that heartbreak can teach clarity, that grief can coexist with joy, and that patience, empathy, and presence are among life's most valuable gifts. I have learned that human connections are precious, that forgiveness is liberating, and that self-awareness is the foundation for meaningful living. Even the nights, once heavy with despair, now carry a sense of calm reflection. I sit quietly, listening to the soft hum of the world outside, observing the moonlight spilling across the floor, and I feel a sense of completeness that does not demand perfection. The heart, even when scarred, has the capacity for renewal, understanding, and quiet joy. I have also come to embrace the inevitability of change. Life will continue to shift, people will move through it differently than we anticipate, and circumstances will evolve. Acceptance of impermanence is not resignation, it is empowerment. It allows me to engage with life fully, to love without clinging, to act with clarity, and to carry hope even amid uncertainty. I often take long walks in the evening with my son. The streets are quiet, the air crisp, the world moving in its slow, deliberate rhythm. We talk, we laugh, we notice small things together. A flower growing through a crack in the sidewalk, the pattern of stars emerging in the sky. These moments remind me that life is both ordinary and extraordinary, and that connection, curiosity, and presence create meaning that endures. I have learned to balance memory and anticipation. I carry the past gently, honoring lessons and moments that shaped me, but I do not allow it to dominate the present. I plan for the future thoughtfully, aware that uncertainty is inevitable, yet embracing it with curiosity rather than fear. This balance, between what has been and what may be, is a source of peace, guiding me in each decision, each interaction, each quiet reflection. I reflect often on the quiet acts of courage that make life meaningful. The courage to forgive, to let go, to remain present, to nurture connection despite vulnerability. These acts are not dramatic, but they are transformative. They shape the heart, cultivate resilience, and allow for the possibility of joy, even after profound sorrow. Through all of this, I have come to appreciate the enduring power of presence. Being present, with myself, with my son, with the world, is the greatest gift I can offer. Presence nurtures connection, anchors the spirit, and creates space for understanding, love, and gratitude. It transforms ordinary moments into experiences of quiet meaning. And finally, I have learned that life, with all its imperfection, unpredictability, and beauty, is to be embraced fully. Heartbreak, grief, and loss have been teachers, showing me both the fragility and resilience of the human spirit. Joy, love, and connection have reminded me of life's capacity for wonder. And through it all, I have discovered a quiet, enduring truth. We are capable of surviving, of growing, and of finding peace, even when the heart has been tested beyond imagination. Sitting by the window one evening, watching the soft light of sunset fade, I whispered softly to myself, I have been broken, and I have been whole. I have loved deeply, lost painfully, and grown patiently. Life continues, and so do I. I will carry love, wisdom, and presence forward. I am here. I am enough. I am ready. In that moment, I felt a sense of quiet closure. Not the closure of forgetting or erasing pain, but the closure of understanding, acceptance, and readiness for the life that continues, beautiful in its impermanence, profound in its lessons, and infinite in its possibilities.